Audie Murphy was America's most decorated soldier, a symbol of courage, a face on posters, a legend of the silver screen. To millions, he was proof that ordinary men could do extraordinary things. But legends are never as simple as they look. Behind the medals and movie lights lay questions no one dared to ask, and a death that refuses to rest quietly. Before the mystery, before the glory, there was only dust, Texas dust. In the summer of 1925, the Murphy family worked a patch of worn-out soil that barely fed them. 12 children, 2 parents, and not enough daylight to earn tomorrow's meal. The Great Depression would arrive later, but the Murphys were already living it. His father drifted away when Audie was still small, leaving his mother to keep the family alive by sheer will. She wore herself down to nothing. When she died, 16-year-old Audie stood over the grave of the only person who had ever believed in him. School ended at 5th grade. Childhood ended sooner. He picked cotton, carried lumber, took any job that would buy a little food. Those years carved him out of hard stone. Responsibility replaced innocence. Silence replaced safety. He learned the rule that would define him. No one is coming to save you. You fight your own way out. Some nights he watched freight trains roll across the horizon and imagined a world beyond the dust. He didn't know it yet, but that world was waiting, and it would find him on a battlefield. When Pearl Harbor fell, Audie Murphy saw a door opening and ran toward it. He was 17, short, wiry, and desperate for purpose. The Marines said no, the Navy said no. Even the paratroopers shook their heads. Too small, they said, too fragile. But the U.S. Army took him, and that single yes changed the course of his life. Training turned out to be the first battle. He pushed until his legs gave way, then pushed again. He fired until his shoulder bruised and his trigger finger bled. Every order became a personal challenge. Prove them wrong. The boy the recruiters had laughed at soon outran half his unit. When he shipped overseas, the desert sun of North Africa burned his skin, but not his resolve. In Sicily, he learned how quickly bravery could vanish, and how quietly fear spoke. By Italy, his commanders had stopped seeing a scrawny kid and started seeing a leader. He didn't brag, didn't boast. He simply moved first, and the others followed. War suited the discipline he had taught himself in poverty. No complaining, no quitting, no waiting for rescue. But war also began to carve deeper lines into him, shaping a kind of courage that left scars no metal could hide. January 26, 1945. France was frozen solid. A white wilderness split by gunfire. Murphy's company had been shredded by tanks. The survivors were retreating through the woods. He stayed. A burning tank destroyer lay ahead, ammunition cooking off like fireworks. Murphy climbed onto the wreck, seized the .50 caliber machine gun, and faced nearly 200 advancing Germans. He fired until the belt ran dry, called in artillery on his own position, and kept firing as flames licked around his boots. For more than an hour, he held the line alone. When the smoke cleared, the field was silent, except for the hiss of melting snow. He limped back to his men, bleeding and deafened, 19 years old. That day earned him the Medal of Honor, and every other decoration the Army could pin on a uniform. Reporters called him the baby-faced warrior. He called himself lucky to be alive. Glory followed, but humility clung tighter. Asked later how he did it, he said, "They were killing my friends." The boy from Texas had become the man America needed, and the burden that came with that would haunt him long after the war ended. Peace arrived like a stranger he didn't trust. Crowds cheered, parades rolled, photographers begged for smiles. But inside, he was still crouched behind that burning tank. He carried his medals in a box, not on his chest. Sleep came only with pills and a loaded pistol under the pillow. Hollywood came calling. Producers wanted the war hero who looked like a movie star. Murphy hesitated, then agreed, partly for money, partly to distract himself from memories. In To Hell and Back, he played himself, reliving the battlefield for cameras that couldn't feel the heat or smell the smoke. Audiences saw courage. He saw ghosts. The film broke box office records, making him a household name. But fame only deepened the distance between the image and the man. Reporters saw confidence. Friends saw a quiet figure drinking too much coffee, staring at nothing. Doctors called it battle fatigue. The term post-traumatic stress didn't exist yet, but he lived it every night. He once told a journalist, "You don't win a war by dying for your country. You win it by making the other man die for his." The line sounded tough on paper, but behind it was exhaustion, the voice of a man still trying to convince himself that killing had meaning. He kept acting because it paid the bills, and gave structure to days that might otherwise collapse. 44 films later, he was still searching for the peace that peace had promised and never delivered. In 1949, he married actress Wanda Hendricks, the kind of Hollywood pairing magazines adore: beauty and bravery, lights and legend. But reality was darker. He woke screaming from dreams, patrolled the house with a pistol, mistrusted laughter that came too easily. Within 2 years, the marriage collapsed under the weight of nerves that refused to heal. 4 days later, he married again, Pamela Archer, a quiet airline stewardess who wanted none of the spotlight. With her, he found a gentler rhythm. 2 sons, a ranch, a life measured in chores instead of premieres. For a while, it worked. He raised horses, wrote songs, and spoke publicly about the struggles of returning soldiers. America wasn't ready for honesty about mental wounds, but Murphy talked anyway. He said the war never left. It just moved indoors. He refused endorsement deals for alcohol and cigarettes, easy money he didn't want. He cared about what young veterans would see when they looked at him. Integrity mattered more than comfort. Still, money slipped through his fingers. He trusted the wrong partners, invested in bad oil deals, and spent freely on friends who never paid back. By the late 1960s, he was juggling scripts, debts, and headaches that never stopped. The world called him a star. He called himself a working man with a famous name. Behind that modest phrase lay fatigue, worry, and the uneasy sense that something, he couldn't say what, was closing in. He'd survived battles, fame, and the slow bleed of insomnia. But the next fight wouldn't come from the front lines. It would come from the sky.
Success should have been a finish line, but for Audie Murphy, it only marked the start of a quieter kind of war. He was famous, admired, and still completely unable to sleep through a night. Every shadow in the hallway felt like movement. Every loud noise made his hand twitch toward the gun on the nightstand. Hollywood saw his calm expression and mistook it for confidence. It was discipline, the same control that had kept him alive overseas. He smiled when directors shouted cut, signed autographs for children, and then drove home to silence so thick he could hear his heartbeat echo. Doctors called it nerves. Friends called it stress. He called it living with ghosts. Some nights, he walked the ranch until dawn, talking to horses as if they were soldiers on watch. He drank black coffee until his hands trembled, refusing stronger medicine because he'd already fought one addiction, the sleeping pills that had nearly taken him apart in the 1950s. He wrote poetry no one saw, lines about the dead and the empty spaces they left behind. He mailed donations anonymously to veterans' hospitals, visited burn wards unannounced, and spent hours listening to men who couldn't find work because nightmares followed them everywhere. They didn't need explanations. They needed someone who understood. But understanding carried a price. The more he helped others, the more his own memories stirred. He told Pamela once, "You can't win against your own head. You just learn to make a truce." She held his hand, but knew the truce was fragile. The late 1960s pressed in around him. Assassinations, riots, wars broadcast in color. America had changed, and the hero it once worshipped no longer fit the times. Audie Murphy, the quiet man who once symbolized victory, now represented a past many wanted to forget. Producers offered fewer roles. Journalists asked questions about relevance. He answered politely, but inside he felt something slipping, a sense that history had moved on without him. To fill the silence, he chased new ventures, business deals, songwriting, horse breeding, anything that kept him busy. Activity became armor, but beneath it all, the same thought kept circling. Maybe survival was never meant to last this long. And as that thought deepened, opportunities began to appear. Odd meetings, risky projects, strangers promising quick profit. Murphy was tired enough to listen, tired enough to believe. What began as restlessness soon became danger, and danger has a way of finding those who think they've outrun it.
By the mid-1960s, the applause had faded to a comfortable hum. Audie Murphy still worked, still smiled for photos, but the light in his eyes dimmed a little. He had survived war, fame, and sleepless nights. But now came the strangest chapter of all, peacetime. He built ranches, invested in oil, and met the wrong people in both worlds. Hollywood was full of charmers who called him buddy and walked away with his money. Politics courted him too. Speeches, charity dinners, veterans campaigns. He was the perfect guest, a symbol the public trusted. Behind closed doors, he heard whispers about new weapons programs and civil projects that didn't sound very civil. Sometimes he asked questions that made people shift in their seats. Sometimes those same people called again the next week, asking him to lend his name to something hush-hush and patriotic. Murphy always meant well. He believed in the flag. But belief has a way of leading you into rooms where truth doesn't travel. At home, money troubles deepened. The oil deal in Algeria collapsed, leaving him nearly $250,000 short. He mortgaged the ranch, sold horses, and took every acting job that came his way. What the public didn't see was a man exhausted by responsibility. The same weight he'd carried since childhood, only heavier now that others depended on him. He kept moving. Movie sets, rodeos, fundraisers, poker nights that turned into business meetings. He wasn't paranoid, but he had learned from war that danger rarely announces itself. By 1970, he was flying small planes again, mostly for convenience. He liked the control, the independence, the silence above the clouds. That silence would be the last sound he ever heard, and what happened next would rewrite the final chapter of the Audie Murphy story. May 28, 1971. The morning was gray over Georgia as the twin-engine Aero Commander lifted off with 6 men on board. Destination: Martinsville, Virginia. Weather reports warned of low ceilings and rain, but Audie had flown through worse. Witnesses later recalled the engine sounding steady, then strained, then silent. At 12:08 p.m., the aircraft vanished from radar near Brush Mountain. Search crews found the wreckage 3 days later, scattered across trees slick with rain. No one survived. News bulletins called it a tragic accident. Headlines praised the hero, replayed movie clips, printed his medals in long columns of type. The world accepted the official cause: poor visibility, pilot error. End of story. But for those who knew him, something didn't add up. Murphy was cautious in bad weather. He never hesitated to delay a flight, and he had complained, only weeks earlier, that one of the aircraft's control systems felt off. The logbook recording that comment disappeared. Pamela, his widow, received the call at home. She didn't ask for details. She simply said, "I knew it was coming." No one understood what she meant. The government's investigation was brief and tidy. The wreckage was cleared, the paperwork filed, the mountain left to its silence. But silence invites speculation, and speculation soon became obsession. Because what people discovered next turned a tragedy into a riddle. Years later, a small group of aviation enthusiasts began revisiting forgotten crash sites from the 60s and 70s. One of them, an engineer from Virginia Tech, took an interest in Murphy's accident. He wasn't chasing conspiracies, he was chasing patterns. And what he found didn't match the official report. Pieces recovered from private collections showed odd scoring on metal that hadn't been explained by fire. Wiring schematics suggested a deliberate rerouting, something no field mechanic would have done by mistake. In one photo, a relay mount was twisted inward rather than outward, meaning pressure had come from inside the unit before impact. It was small evidence, but evidence nonetheless. At the same time, new Freedom of Information releases exposed fragments of unrelated memos, references to Liaison Murphy, test screenings for DoD co-op material, and potential security exposure. Hollywood, no direct accusation, just breadcrumbs that led nowhere clear, and yet everywhere suspicious. Friends remembered seeing him anxious in those months. He told one reporter, half joking, "Some folks don't like what I know." No one asked what he meant. The amateur researchers built a timeline: odd meetings, missing documents, maintenance records rewritten after the fact. When they compared those notes to declassified communications from the same week, something aligned. An unmarked government flight had diverted near the same coordinates minutes before the crash. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidences accumulate. By the late 90s, independent investigators openly suggested sabotage. The theory gained traction online, that Murphy had stumbled onto information linking Hollywood, the Pentagon, and covert operations during the Cold War, and that someone decided the safest hero was a silent one. There was no proof, only fragments, whispers, and a pattern too neat to ignore. But if it wasn't sabotage, then what exactly was it? Most stories end with certainty. Murphy's ends with doubt. Two versions now compete for truth. The first is simple and tragic: a tired pilot lost in fog, a hero in the wrong seat at the wrong time. The second is subtle and sinister, a man silenced because he saw too much or trusted too little. Between them lies the version most historians quietly accept, the middle ground. According to updated analyses of weather patterns, the storm that day was violent enough to cause instrument malfunction. If the electrical system had even a minor fault, gauges could freeze while reading normal. Add mountain terrain and low altitude, and disaster becomes almost unavoidable. Sabotage, in that sense, wouldn't need an assassin, only negligence. The mystery, then, isn't just how the plane fell, but why so many details vanished afterward. Why did maintenance logs change? Why were some witnesses never interviewed? Why did official reports close within weeks when similar cases dragged on for months? One retired FAA inspector later admitted, "There was pressure to wrap it fast. Nobody wanted controversy around a national hero." That single statement explains everything and nothing at once. So perhaps the cover-up wasn't murder. It was embarrassment, an effort to protect reputations, not eliminate lives. Yet even that softer version leaves a bitter taste, the idea that truth bowed to convenience. For fans and family, no theory feels sufficient. They lost a man, not a myth, and myths, once cracked, never fit back together. Still, the search for answers kept going because the shadow of doubt moves slower than time. Half a century later, the mountain is quiet again. The trees have grown over the scar where the plane struck. Hikers pass a stone marker along the Appalachian Trail. Few realize how much controversy is buried beneath their feet. Audie Murphy remains the most decorated American soldier in history. His grave at Arlington draws thousands every year, second only to JFK's. Children trace the name on the marble, teachers tell the simplified story, and veterans salute the man who spoke for them when no one else would. But history is never just medals and monuments. It's also the unanswered questions we learn to live with. Did he die by chance or by design? Was it fate, failure, or foul play? The evidence suggests all three could whisper in the same wind. What we do know is this: he faced every battle, on land, on film, in his mind, with the same unyielding resolve. He turned fear into duty, pain into art, and silence into a kind of courage the camera couldn't fake. If his death was an accident, then it was the cruelest irony, that the man who survived tanks and bullets was undone by fog. If it was something darker, then it proves that heroism doesn't always die in combat. Sometimes it's erased in paperwork. Either way, the legacy remains untouchable. Murphy's story teaches what bravery truly costs. Not just blood, but peace. And the mystery of his final flight reminds us that truth, like a signal lost in static, can fade but never completely disappear. He once wrote a poem that ended, "Freedom flies in your heart like an eagle." Maybe that's the answer hidden in all the speculation. The man who carried freedom on his back now rests where the eagles still circle, far above the noise of rumor. Audie Murphy's mystery may never be fully solved, and maybe it shouldn't be, because legends aren't built on certainty. They're built on the questions that refuse to die. And somewhere on that quiet mountain, the wind still carries his name.